morning. Welcome to our Fall Caregivers Conference. Our team basically put this whole thing together, and I'm so grateful for the hard work that it took to get it going. And we have a nonprofit dedicated to dementia. And our Caregivers Conference is through the lens of looking at caregiving form of dementia caregiving, which is a little different. But we have two big conferences every year, one in the fall, which is the Caregiver Conference we're at today. The one in the spring, we had one May 4th downtown here in St. Cloud, devoted more to the science of dementia and so forth. But when we've now been seeing clients at our Dementia Resource Center for a couple of years, and we've come to realize that probably 90% of our effort is geared towards caregivers. We know if the caregivers stay healthy and we make the caregivers stronger, give them more strength, more resolve in what they do, it will help our clients. We can't do one without the other. And so we've come to realize that. And we believe in something called comprehensive dementia care. You're going to hear that exact word a lot in the coming years because the federal government is finally getting their act together and getting ready to start actually paying for comprehensive dementia care, which we've been doing for 2.5 years, but not getting paid very well for it. So, caregiving has a whole spectrum. You can be a caregiver if you drive Mary to church once a week down the street. You're a caregiver if you're a neighbor who shovels the snow and cuts the grass for John or Mary or whoever is living with dementia on your street, maybe lives alone. You're a caregiver. If your friend is a caregiver and you support them in their caregiving, you're a caregiver to the caregiver, sort of a caregiver squared, if you will. But that's a caregiver. And then the spectrum changes. You get a little closer. So you may be a son or a daughter of someone living with dementia. Maybe you visit once a week or twice a week or 3 times a week or every day. We see that level. If you're the spouse or the lifetime partner of someone living with dementia, you're into caregiving a little bit more once something starts that requires caregiving. But caregiving has a spectrum all by itself. By the time you realize that you are a caregiver, you've probably been into it 2 or 3 years. We don't even know. It sneaks up on you. Like, I've been doing this for him for the last year. I never had to do that for him before. And it sneaks up on you. The spectrum changes a little bit when things get a little worse. Again, we're talking dementia, but the caregiving principles, I think, apply across the board for any condition for which you're doing caregiving. It gets a little worse. And, when you start off in, let's say, marriage, and the 2 people are married, 5% of you is caregiver for each other because you're sort of each other's caregiver. But you have the benefits of the bounty of your relationship. That relationship is so important. And you get to focus more on that when you're first together. And there's not too much focus on the caregiving part. Oh, you look out after each other. You sometimes do each other's little house duties or whatever. But when something starts to disrupt that relationship, like dementia, it can disrupt it in a big way. And it can happen really fast once you realize you're into it. But as I said, quite often we don't recognize that we are caregivers until we've been into it a year or 2 or more, quite often. But that percentage starts to change. Another few years into it, and 50% of our life is you caregiving. 50% is the benefits of the relationship, the warmth, the tenderness, we solve the problems of the world together as a team. That's a real important part of the relationship. But as things move on a little bit more, you become 75% caregiver, maybe 25% benefits, and then 90% and 10%, and so on. Caregiving can take a toll on caregivers. And if you are a caregiver for someone you love for more than a year, and you're really into it, you're beyond the beginning spectrum, part of the spectrum, that's a great risk for yourself, for dementia. that stress of caregiving at least a year or longer of someone close to you. I'm not talking about professional caregivers, but we're talking about family, usually. It could be a neighbor, it could be a friend, a dear friend, and we've seen that relationship too. But more and more it becomes caregiving and less the benefits of the relationship. And that's where it gets really hard. But you know, we try to encourage caregivers, look for that 5% that's left. Look for that little spark in their eye that every once in a while you see. It's like when your 5-month-old baby smiles at you meaningfully the first time. Every once in a while you get that little spark of your 50 years of living together, and you get to feel that benefit still. So we encourage our caregivers, stop, think, find those moments, and enjoy them, celebrate them. Very important. And we see how people can be almost saint-like in how they caregive. Others are still angry. They're angry that he won't balance the checkbook. Doggone it, he did it for years and now he won't do it anymore. We see that. But we try to get people to think about those special moments where things seem to click and today went really well, and let's celebrate that and enjoy that. We try to look at the strengths of our clients that we see, not their deficits as much. We need to point them out for insurance and for other reasons, but we try to celebrate what's good in each day, what's good in their particular medical situation, and so forth. So, in reality, who isn't a caregiver? You know, in my mind, there's two kinds of people in the world. Those who are caregivers, past or present, and those who will be caregivers. Two kinds of people. That's the way I look at it. So who here who's willing to say so is a caregiver? Good, because we're all caregivers. There's hardly any of us who won't be, unless you're a sociopath or a hermit. You're going to be a caregiver, and that's just the way it is. So this conference is for you. This is devoted to caregiving, and it pertains to other caregiving, not just for dementia, but we're looking at it through the lens of dementia. We think dementia is a big issue in our community, as it is in every community around our state. Our goal is to create our Dementia Resource Center clinic here in town and have maybe 20 similar clinics develop around the state with some statewide office regulating and supplying and supporting a network of Dementia Resource Center clinics like ours. That's where we'd like to be. That's our vision for the future. Our mission is to improve access to quality dementia care in our community. Now, our community, turns out, stretches out 100 miles. We've seen people from that far away, and we turn nobody away. So far, they're all Minnesota. There is a licensing issue that we need people, but we've had people from Chicago and other areas call us because they just don't find a resource like what we offer here, where they are. So this meeting is for you, and if you have questions, we're going to have each speaker, we're going to have 4 wonderful speakers. It's a lawyer sandwich. We have 2 attorneys in the middle speaking the second and the third presentation. We have Dr. Hoover and Jim Otremba on the outside, the bread of the sandwich, teaching us about how we can take care of ourselves as caregivers, how important that is. And let's take our time today to celebrate that. So I'd like to introduce our emcee for today, Cyn Bolsta, who is a radio personality. Most of you have heard her voice at one time or another. Cyn, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I am no longer a radio personality, but I still have a big personality. I am here not because I was in radio. I'm here because up until last Tuesday afternoon, I was a caregiver, and that's when my mom died, last Tuesday. So we started out with my dad in the early 2000s with Alzheimer's, caregiver there. He was at Country Manor for a number of years, and my mom went every day. So I moved back from Portland, Oregon in 2010 to be with my mom, and we had some great years. But then as the years wore on, I became more of a caregiver than a roommate, and it was it sounds so corny, but I really think it was the honor of my life to be able to care for my mom to the end of her life, which I guess I'm an ex-caregiver now, but I mean, I guess you're always a caregiver, right, Dr. Zook? So I know I saw a lot of people say, yes, it was pretty tragic, and I'm here and I'm not crying, so I guess that means it was a pretty good end for her, and I helped facilitate that. So I just want to say, if you have anything going on with your parents or anything unspoken, we didn't leave one word unspoken, nothing. It was all wonderful. So I hope that is the case for the rest of you. But I don't want to bring the room down. We're here to learn a lot, and I'm still going to learn because I intend to keep on caregiving. So I want to welcome Dr. Steve Hoover. He's going to talk to us about mindfulness, and that is something, caregiver or not, everybody can use a little bit of. So, Steve.
Well, good morning, everyone. That was lukewarm. Good morning. That's better. Yes, I'm Steve Hoover, and I'm just getting all my stuff arranged here. So I have slideshow. So imagine a slide. No, I have a slideshow. Okay, so welcome. I'm going to be talking about mindfulness, and one of the things I'm going to be doing is kind of a combination of, it's that technology stuff. You know, you got to turn it on. Okay, there's your staff. There's your agenda. There's me. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing today is talking about mindful presence. So my challenge is to try to stay put here. I move around a lot. I was a former professor and teacher, so I have to have PowerPoints. That's the only way I can do any of this stuff. So the focus for me today is on this concept of mindful presence. So I've taught mindfulness for a number of years. I've taught the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And so I've been involved with this for, geez, you say it a quarter of a century, it makes you feel really old. But I started when I was 5. So one of the things that we're going to do today is I'm going to talk about some content. And yes, I'm going to cover a lot of information. What I am doing right now is distilling down a class that I teach at Whitney that hopefully we'll be offering again in the future called Mindful Presence. It's compassionate care for self and others. So as I'm going to talk about it a little bit here, the idea of compassion, I'm going to talk a little bit about what compassion is, what it isn't. There's some misunderstandings out there about what compassion is. And then I'm going to talk about some of the strategies that we use to be present for those in our lives. So while it's applicable for the audience that we've got today, it's also applicable for anybody that's in a relationship with anybody else, which means should be all of us unless, as Pat said, you're a hermit somewhere. So I'm going to take us through this journey today, and I'm going to move quickly, and I apologize for that because I've cut it down as much as I can, but there's so much that I want to share that it's difficult for me to hit just the highlights of this. So I'm going to talk about a 5-phase journey in this. So one of the things I would encourage you as we look going to the future here is we have offered this at Whitney Senior Center as a full class over 5 or 6 weeks, and hopefully come next year we'll be offering it again at Whitney Senior Center as a 5 or 6 sessions, generally about an hour and a half each session with homework. I was a teacher. So there's things that we do away from all of this. So let me just get going on this. It's compassionate care for self and others. And we start by setting an intention. If you've ever been at a yoga class, I've gone to yoga classes. I really like yoga classes. I love the beginning and the end of yoga classes. I'm really good at the mountain pose where you just stand there, and I'm really good at corpse pose where you just lay down on the ground. Those two I am great at. All those other things, not so much. But what we do at the beginning of a session is we talk about setting an intention. And I think this is so critical for us, is to set an intention for what we want to get out of something. Otherwise, we go wherever the presenter's telling us, but we're not sure what we want to carry away from this. So I always start by asking us to set an intention for what we want to do. And then I talk about a study that I saw years and years ago, way back in year 2000. And it was in Washington, D.C., and it was part of a conference on positive psychology, which is another area of interest of mine. And there were researchers there talking about it, but it was a graduate student who was doing research on that simple thing that many of us have had when we've been out doing work and we come home and somebody says, "So how was your day, dear?" Okay, you've all had that experience, right? I always know that I'm in trouble if the dear isn't on the end of that. So one of the things that he saw in his research was that there were 4 general responses to this. One was, "I survived." And we've all had those days where we just got through the day, we survived. Then there were those that, "I'm busy." And that's kind of not quite as bad as survival mode, but I got a lot of stuff done. Then there's that third one, which I was productive. Those are the ones where, how many of you are list makers and to-do list makers? And I strongly recommend, as a stress management, I used to teach stress management strategy, to make lists, because it's a great thing to do. You can check them off. And you know what you do? The first thing on your list is, right? Make a list. Because then you get to check that off, and it's motivational. Now, here's the downside of that, though, is that the list sometimes, I talk about the tyranny of the to-do list. Sometimes that list, when it's expansive and you've got to get it all done by a certain period of time, actually pulls you away from being present to other people. So we have to be cautious about how we use those strategies. But then what was really interesting wasn't the first 3 categories, it was the responses to the last category, which was the smallest number of people in his study. And those were the people that said, "I made a difference." And when he surveyed them further, what he found is their quality of life was higher, their stress was lower, but most importantly, they set an intention at the beginning of the day to make a difference in somebody's life. It may be small, it may be large, it doesn't matter. They were looking for opportunities to make a difference in someone's life. The difference between that group and the other 3 is the other 3 were able to reflect at the end of a day on chances that were there, but chances that might have been missed because they were into their day. So the idea of setting an intention is critical to focus what you want for that day. So setting an intention is critical, not just for others, but from the point of view, and this is not his research, this I added, is we also ask the question, what did I do for myself today? What did I do for myself today that makes me a better person, makes me feel better? So here's your first challenge, is what I want you to think about is to establish a daily difference initiative. And that means you set the intention at the beginning of the day. You don't set it someplace and hope that it happens, because what we find is that doesn't work. It's like exercise and all those other things we're supposed to do. We need to set that intention every day. And the people that I work with that have done this, they'll have Post-it notes. So they'll put something somewhere that they will see it to remind them that today I'm going to be looking for opportunities to make a difference. And they're everywhere. And then what's really important too is at the end of the day, reflect on those. Maybe in a journal, maybe writing some things down that you made a difference today. And then the gratitude practice, which I'll talk about a little later on, is very nice to link with this. Now, the other thing I should have mentioned at the beginning, I did, and I apologize for this. If you would like my slides, because I'm going to give you a lot of information, I know that. You know, nowadays we've got cameras. I've already seen somebody taking a picture, and those are great. That's fine. It works. But if you want, I'm more than happy to send you my slides. I'll be around today. I can give you my email address. It's just steve.hoover@cmcoa.org. But I'll give you that later because I've got a timekeeper over here that's going to be flashing stuff at me in a little bit. Yeah, I know, I'm moving. All right, so set an initiative, and here's your simple plan for the day. I was a teacher, so you got to have a plan for something you get out of this. Number 1, think about as you're going through today, what is something I could start doing today? I've already given you one. What is something I could start doing today? But by the same token, I'm going to talk about some other things. What's something I could stop doing? Stop doing because maybe it's not doing what it needs to do for me. And there's not a lot of people that get up in the morning and say, I'm 69, I'm going to continue to do all the stupid things I've done for the last 69 years. We don't say that when we get up, but we fall into habits sometimes of doing those things. So what is something I'm going to stop? One thing. And then, what am I going to continue doing? Because a lot of us are already doing really great things. So we want to recognize those things that we're doing, and maybe we want to continue and expand those. And then the other one I like, too, is just the simple question of, gee, that's interesting, what he talked about today. I want to explore it a little bit more. Not sure if I really want to start doing it, but I want to learn more about it. So there's your personal plan. So we'll be checking those personal plans before you leave today. All right, so here's the overview of this. The overview of this is that what we do is we start with inward training. And it seems self-centered, but I use the metaphor of a bowl, and I'll talk about this in just a second. But basically the idea is we got to get our house together. We have to be, in order for me to be present to somebody else, I have to not dump on them all of my stuff. So part of its process is literally turning inward and examining ourselves, examining our biases, examining who we are, with the idea that compassionately we'll be able to move outward to work with others. So it really is this sense of turning inward. So there is a wonderful quote by Arthur Kleinman. He was writing about his 10 years as a caregiver for his wife, who was living with and eventually passed away with Alzheimer's. In his 2020 book, The Soul of Care, he wrote, "Care is an elaboration of the love that we have for others. That is why I believe it is not just an emotion, but a moral emotion." And I was struck by that. I think that there is a moral obligation to do this internal work so that we're not dumping on other people. I know when I was a dean at the School of Education, I found that I needed about 10 minutes between meetings, because what I found I was doing is I was taking all the stuff, I use other words sometimes, all the stuff from one meeting, and I was carrying it over into the next meeting. And that's not fair to that person who comes in with his or her personal needs. How many have ever been involved in a conversation where all you, well, yes, everybody raised their hand. I did. There was a pause there. How many have ever been involved in a conversation where you're not really talking and listening? What you're doing is you're waiting for the other person to shut up so you can talk about what you want to talk about. And it's like two cars or boats passing in the night. We don't really hear each other. Nobody really listens. We're just waiting for the other person, and sometimes not patiently, to shut up so that we can talk about what we want to talk about. So mindful presence is that idea of I need to empty my bowl before I sit with somebody else so that I can, quote unquote, hold that other person and listen compassionately to that other person. So I talk about, now I'm going to skip a couple things here. Emptying our bowl. So the idea of, so this was a few years ago, I was invited to do this presentation with the McElhaney Company. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Does anybody know what that is, what they make? They make Tabasco sauce. This is my favorite sauce, okay? And furthermore, do you know where they are? Yeah, they're not too far from New Orleans, Louisiana. And I was so excited. They're going to fly me down to, no, they're not. It was a video thing, and I was so depressed. But anyway, I talked about mindful presence, and in particular, I talked about this concept of us needing to empty our bowl. And so a lot of what I'll talk about here is how do we empty our bowls so that we can be present to other people. Well, this one lady in there works in HR, and she sent a picture of what she had done to remind her between clients. Is she'd taken one of those non-environmentally friendly bowls, and she had cut it and written the words, "Empty your bowl," there, so that she would have that reminder in being present that as she went from one client to the next, she didn't want to carry over that client's stuff along with her stuff onto the next person. Now, as you'll see as I talk about this, this is not easy. This is hard work. This is some of the toughest work I think that we can do, is to be present to other people. So last quote. He's a Jungian therapist, James Hollis. He argues strongly for the courageous responsibility for each of us to examine ourselves in relation to our impact on others. And he says, quote, "Examining this material," basically the stuff in our bowl, "is not a form of self-indulgence." That's an important point. This is not self-indulgence. It is a way of taking responsibility for our choices and consequences. It is an act of great moral moment for it brings the possibility of lifting our stuff off of others. Surely the most ethical and useful thing we can do for those around us. So I think it's important that we recognize that this is something we are doing, yes, for ourselves, but really it's for those around us. So if you've been on an airplane, you know the statement at the beginning that you put your mask on before you help others. That's exactly what we're kind of talking about in this. So what is compassion? So this will be on your quiz. You notice there's a lot of things here, but I really want to make a point about this. And we could talk all day about this idea of compassion. And I'm going to make some particular statements about compassion. But if you look at here, there are several things on this that are important. There is a recognition of the suffering or need in another. And then there is that actual physical response to that. That's a really important thing. How many of you watched the news and saw what happened in Maine? We're also coming into that time of year where the ASPCA will have those ads on with the dogs that are suffering and the cats that are suffering. I shouldn't say it that way, but they're suffering, and that creates a lot of distress. My mom, she passed away in December, she was 96, and she would watch those ads because she says, I need to know what's going on in the world on television. And I said, Mom, you don't. But I understood what her need was, and she would just get so upset. And that's empathic distress, as I'll talk about. So she would literally feel that subjective physical experience of stress. And that would trigger her autonomic nervous system, her sympathetic, her fight or flight response, and then she would just get worked up. And she would get worked up. And so there was this body feeling, social role, the abilities, can I do this? And I'll come back to this in a few minutes, of a need to do this. Now, the other thing that's somewhat the dark side of this notion of compassion is that sometimes, this last one, we talk about discernment. How many times have we looked at somebody and felt they deserve what's going on to them? They deserve it, okay? And yet we don't know their life. We don't know what they've gone through. So we have to watch how often we judge. Judgment's a part of all of this as well. So it's really important to think about how this works. So we see somebody who's suffering. We react to that suffering personally. We take it in, unless, as Pat says, you're a sociopath or one of those, or hermit. We take that in. We actually have a bodily stress reaction to observing stress or unmet need in someone else. And then we are motivated to do something about it. Where the problem comes in, now, this is, let me address this because I have to be very, very careful here. How many have heard the term compassion fatigue? Okay, I'm going to tell you right now that doesn't exist. Let me pause here, and don't sit there and look at me and going, I've had it. No, I know what you're talking about. It's really empathy fatigue. Compassion is recognizing the unmet need in someone else and then working to alleviate that need. Whenever you've done a daily difference, how does that feel? You feel good. When somebody has a need and you do something to alleviate that need, that feels good. It alleviates the stress. What we experience when we can't do anything about it is what's called empathic distress. And empathic distress is where we are in that state of arousal and there isn't anything we can do about it. Or we don't choose to do anything about it. So let me talk about that ASPCA commercial for just a second. So my mom would see that every year. It's going to come on here. I've seen a few of them already. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, it's American Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and they run ads in order to raise money, okay? And they're obviously, they want to get at your heartstrings. So my mom would watch this, and I'd say, Mom, there's a simple solution. There's two simple solutions. Number one, turn off the damn television. But that wasn't going to happen. But she would get so upset. And I'd say, okay, let's take a look at this for just a second. Let's analyze this. If you, because she was getting her checkbook out, if you send money to them, how much of that actually gets to the animals? I'm seeing some head nodding, so you may have looked at this or you've heard this before. It's in the range of, 10% that actually gets to them. The rest of it goes for advertising and all those other things, which raise money. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But when I said that to her, she kind of paused. And I knew that wasn't enough then. So I said, here's a simple solution. I get your groceries every week. when I pick up your groceries, I will buy a bag of dog food, and I will drop it, dog food, because we're not cat people. I will take a bag of dog food out to the Tri-County Humane Society and drop it off. All of your money will go directly into feeding the dogs in our area. She loved that. She felt better. So we had moved from empathic distress, which, by the way, is self-focused. Empathic distress is self-focused. So there's one of two things happen. You either move into compassion, or you find ways to alleviate that stress that aren't necessarily compassionate. You turn away. You do other things. So compassion is that parasympathetic. Now that's the relax and restore function here. So the opportunities to be compassionate are extremely important. Now, I'm going to enter into another section here because I want to talk about some of the barriers we have to compassion, to really being present for someone else. Now, this is a wonderful poem by Rachel Stafford. This is one of those cases where you might want to get this material from me. I'm happy to send you these. And I can't read this. So I've got a volunteer that is going to come up and read this for me. I can't get through it, is what I'm saying. So she's going to come up and she's going to read this for me. All right, here we go.
I know someone going through a hard time, and I will not make it harder by making it about me. I know someone going through a hard time. He's irritable, overreactive, and difficult to be around. That's grief talking, I remind myself. And my love expands like an umbrella in a downpour. I know someone going through a hard time. She's moody and over the top dramatic. That's teen angst talking, I remind myself. And my love settles and steadies like a faithful friend. I know someone going through a hard time. She's emotional, fidgety, and anxious. That's fear talking, I remind myself, and my love whispers to her like a calming prayer. I know someone going through a hard time. He's slow, repetitive, and forgetful. That's growing old talking, I remind myself, and my love supports him like an old oak tree. I know someone going through a hard time. She's awkward and sassy. That's hormones talking, I remind myself, and my love endures like a worn pair of blue jeans. I know someone going through a hard time. He's irritable, defensive, and angry. That's depression talking, I remind myself, and my love breaks through the clouds and warms his face. It's not easy to respond when I want to retreat, to forgive when I want to freak out, to detect when I want to dictate, to bite my tongue when I want to bite back. But when I do, love does the talking. And when love speaks, peace is felt, healing begins, miracles happen in front of us and within us. It's a beautiful way to begin a new season. Let's begin.
Give my back on. Give her a hand. Okay, so I can't get through that. That's why I have somebody else read it for me. But what did you notice about each one of those passages? In each case, what she's talking about is not the person, is the person's emotions. And so often, one of the barriers for us to be compassionately present to someone else is that our stuff, our emotions, are interfacing and reacting to their emotions. We aren't really reacting to the person. What we're acting to is the person's emotions. So when I retired, I was pain in the ass. I was irritable, I was grouchy, I was angry. Keep in mind, I'm a guy. Those are the emotions I'm allowed to have. We talk about anger as a cover emotion for males because we're not allowed to have those other things. We're not allowed to cry, except when the Twins and the Vikings lose. But even then, it's only a tear. It's, we can't break down. So this whole passage that she read for me, fortunately, I do that in part because I will not get through it, but also I'm a guy. I don't do those things, emotions in public. But the problem with that is it's a cover emotion. What happened when I retired is I was scared. I was afraid. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd had money coming in for 40-some years, and now we were going to lie on the stock market and all those things. So it was fear that was really underlying that emotion. But what could I do? I could express anger. And so then my wife is reacting to my anger until she realized what it really was and pointed out to me. I'm a little slow. So when we're doing this program, all of that's by way of kind of an introduction. Here's the gist of compassionate presence, is what we want to do. Imagine this triangle, and I came up with this when I was at the university teaching the mindfulness-based stress reduction program one time, and it really is centered on three things. Our body, because that's where we experience stress first in our body. We don't recognize it often there, but that's where we experience it first. Then we have emotional feelings related to that, and then we put these thoughts on top of it. That is the cycle. And if we understand that cycle, we can interrupt that cycle and stop that emotional reaction and stop those words from coming out. Now, if you'll notice in the center there is it says react or act. So there's a quote that's attributed to Viktor Frankl. Turns out he didn't actually say it. But what it was is he made the case that between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. If the doorbell rings, my dog does what? It barks. Dog's got no space in there. But for humans, between the stimulus and the response, there's a space. And it's in that space that we can choose how we're going to act versus react. It's in that space that we can find our humanity. And it's in that space that we can find our compassion. So the whole point of all of this is to open up that space where we start initially with what's going on in my body. I'm experiencing stress. Why? I'm going to talk a little bit more about each one of these. And then these are the emotions that are attached to that. And these are the thoughts that overlay those emotions. So I presented this one time as I working through. I'm a teacher. I like to get everything down to one picture. And so I presented this, and the next week a person came into my class. She used to be in charge of the Student Health Center over at St. Cloud State. And I said, so how's it going this week? And she looked at me and she went like this, with the tiniest little triangle she could make. And I knew exactly what she was saying. I have no space right now. I have no space to be for anybody else. The next week she came in and she was trying to make this huge triangle. She said it was, and you could see the smile on her face. There was this big triangle. She felt a lot of space. So a lot of what we do is we talk about how do we find this space, body, emotions, and thoughts, so that we can, I'm going to skip this, move to that next page. So I want you to compare those two triangles. Actually, everything's right here. Notice in the center is the react or act piece, the body, the emotions, the thoughts. We do that inward work so that we can move outward with kindness, compassion, joy, and balance in our lives. But we have to do that inward work first. And that's the hardest part of this, is to do that inward work. So let me take you through just these general 5 steps on this. Phase 1 is we work with our body. We are not really good at recognizing when stress emerges in our body. So there's the vagus nerve, which connects the head, the heart, and the stomach. And one of the things we find, I used to do this before I would do a presentation, where I'd start to get anxious. Where do you feel that anxiety first? In your stomach, the butterfly effect. You can feel it in your stomach. And then, once I'd feel that anxiety, it would be, oh yeah, I've got this to do next, and this to do next. We refer to it sometimes as free-floating anxiety. If you've ever had that, you're feeling a little anxious, and then if you pause, then you realize, oh yeah, that's why I had a fleeting thought run through my mind. That's why I'm anxious. Well, we recognize it in the body first. If we recognize it, it occurs there. Then the next step is it moves out of the body into our emotions and our thoughts. Thoughts actually are at the end of this stream. although that's often what we recognize are the thoughts. So what we start with is just getting in tune with our body. We start with what I call body scan, breathing activity. I'm going to just give you the gist of it because I need to make a point about something. So we're going to do a very, 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 very brief body scan. When I do this with the class, we do it for 45 minutes. No one is still awake. So if you want this, by the way, all the meditations I talk about are still online at St. Cloud State. So if you do meditation, St. Cloud State University, it'll take you right to that site. And I'm still there. You can hear my voice, for better or worse, talking you through the body scans. But here's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to lead you through just a part of it, a start of it, because I want you to get the gist of it. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to sit upright in your chair as best you can. I would like you to, if you're comfortable, close your eyes. You don't have to. If you prefer not to close your eyes, then what I'd like you to do is just soften your gaze and look at something in front of you. Just don't stare at it. It's just soften your gaze. And now I'd like you to take a couple of nice breaths with me. So we're going to do it. In breath and to a count, and an out breath to a count. So here we go. In breath, 2, 3, 4. Pause. Out breath. 2, 3, 4. In breath. 2, 3, 4. Out breath. 2, 3, 4. Now, go back to normal breathing. I want you to bring your attention, your focus down to your right foot. I know it sounds strange, but just imagine you're bringing all of your focus and attention down to that right foot. And now what I want you to do is I want you to simply notice any sensations you're experiencing in your right foot. Don't make anything happen. Don't do anything. You may not notice anything. That's okay. But what I want you to focus on is the sensation, any sensations you're experiencing. Try very hard not to label them. So in other words, if you're noticing something in your big toe, and you recently stubbed your big toe, and you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this, I'm not going to be able to do that, I've got a pain in my big toe, you've labeled. Go back to just noticing the sensation. And now look at the left foot. Notice the sensations you're experiencing in your left foot, the top of the foot, the bottom of the foot, the heel, the toes. And then just gradually move up your body and notice whatever sensations you're experiencing. Don't label them. Don't do anything about them. All I want you to do is recognize that you're having these sensations. And then we continue this process all the way up to our head, and we notice any sensations we're experiencing in our shoulders, our back, our neck, our face. And we just notice what's going on in our body. We're giving ourselves permission to just notice, not label, not judge. And now let's take one more deep breath and let the air out. Let me talk about this for just a second. This is a critical first thing to do. This is something, by the way, you can do anywhere. I don't expect you to do it during driving. But if anywhere you're in line at a store and you're getting irritated because all the people in front of you are in the checkout line with only 8 items and they've got 450 in their cart, that you're starting to feel these emotions rising up in you, you can take this second to breathe. You can look at it. Now, what was that I asked you to do? I asked you to watch for sensations. Sensations are just those things we receive from our senses. That's why they're called sensations. Okay? It's the things we notice, we feel. But what do we do with those very, very quickly? We turn a sensation into a perception. So I notice something's going on in my knee. I notice it. That's the sensation. What do I do right after that? I'm not going to be able to run tomorrow. This could be the beginnings of a knee replacement problem. And all of a sudden, I'm stressed, and I've created this whole story based on something that's just a little something going on in my knee. We do this all the time. It's where we move from a sensation to a perception. And that's a critical first part of stress management is recognizing that I'm having a sensation. It doesn't have to be a perception. I don't have to overlay a story on it. So I'm going to hit this point more often. So we work with our body. We do breathing activities, very, very important. So there's a recent study, I just gave Pat a copy of it, that came out in Nature magazine last March, and it talked about that little breathing activity I just did a minute ago, 5 breaths in, 5 breaths out. Do that for 20 minutes a day, and it appears to reduce the amyloid proteins in the blood. In other words, they came out with this big article that says breathing for brain health may actually be preventive for Alzheimer's. It's a stretch, but I get the point. It reduces stress. And that's a simple activity. Breathing in, breathing out. 5 times in, 5 times out. Do it over a period of a day, especially when your body starts to feel the stress. So as we do the program, what we start to recognize is people are starting to recognize in their body when stress is emerging. All right, so we check our balance at various times and places on this. So this is a point to check in and say, how am I doing? How's it going? We take a breath in, breath out. All right, phase 2 is working with our emotions. I'm a guy. I love talking about emotions, other people's emotions. I don't have emotions. I'm a guy. So what we do with emotions is understand that emotions, and notice the words I highlighted, are perceptions of sensations. A sensation is just a sensation. It's just something going on in your body that is being recognized. But what we do is we need to recognize that perceptions of emotions have a message. There is a reason you're angry about something. There is a reason, and we need to explore that. I'll come to that in a second. Emotional sensitivity allows for the awareness of the emotions as they arise. But that's part of the body scan process. That's part of recognizing in my body how I react to stress. And then emotional awareness allows for, and I use the word space a lot, that's the space part. I'm starting to open up the space. I'm not focusing on the physical reaction to the emotion. I'm exploring what the emotion means. And then emotional intelligence allows us how we're going to choose to act on that. It doesn't mean that I never act on my anger. It means I am cautious and compassionate about how I act on my anger. It means that I am deliberate in my action, not just reacting. So there's a great book out there. I strongly recommend this. I do a lot of work with men and boys on emotions, and this is a great book I recommend when I've got mothers of young men to talk about the idea of permission to feel. Because a minute ago I said men are allowed one emotion publicly to share, and that's it, anger. It's pretty much it. Not violence, but anger. And yet there's a whole category of emotions. One of the things I find is there's a term called male normative alexithymia. What that means is, man, we just don't recognize our emotions. And that's very true because we've never been taught how to do that. We don't have the language for emotion in that. So helping young men, helping all men, recognize the emotions that they're experiencing, I think is a critical part in our being able to do that inward training so that we're not dumping those emotions on others. So here's a very simple acronym for this process. It's called RAIN on Your Emotions. So R is recognize the emergence of an emotion. That's the body scan. That's recognizing that anxiety. I was a teacher Sunday afternoon, always Sunday afternoon. I'd get those little butterflies, and I'd recognize I was anxious. And then I'd have to stop and ask, well, what am I anxious about? Well, all the stuff I had to do over the week. Then A is to accept that you're having that emotion. It's amazing how often people push that away. I'm not angry. And they say it angrily, but accept that you're having it. And then what I think is most important is take the time to do the 2 I's here. Identify it, in other words, label it. Labeling, by the way, is an extremely important thing to do, is to recognize and give it a name, and then investigate it. What's going on? Why am I having this emotion? Why? So as I talked about retirement, I needed to really get a hold on why I was feeling anxious, why I was angry. I wasn't angry, I was scared. I was fearful. It was the idea that I needed to explore that, and then I went back to work. And then N is to not identify with the emotion. This is so important. So let me take you to the next one. So emotional reactions are habits. How often do you slide into, okay, so Pat was talking about marriages, and I've been married for 47 years. 47 years. How often when your partner does something do you go right to point 10? Because it's a habit. They've done a trigger on you. My son was incapable of getting the dishes 2.5 feet from the sink to the dishwasher. I do the cooking at home. It's self-preservation. And when I would come home after school and I'd need to do the cooking, but what did I have to do first? I had to get the damn dishes out of there because he couldn't move it from there to there. So I'm already irritated. And what I found out is I was having anticipatory anger. When I would get in the car over at the university thinking, okay, I got to get home and start dinner, I'm already thinking, and those damn dishes are going to be in there. And Nick never cleans up after himself. I'm already mad at Nick, and I don't know if he's done a damn thing. So part of this is I needed to look at the habits that emerge, and anger and irritation are habits we have with people, not the people themselves, but what they do. So anyway, there's an old saying, that which we resist will persist. I talk about this with emotions. When we suppress them, we push them aside, they do not go away. They go down in the basement and they lift weights. And they wait until you're vulnerable. How many of during the day, I used to experience this during the day, there's all these little, Pat and I were talking about this before, these little subclinical stressors. We actually are all pretty good with a crisis. We know how to manage a crisis. We go into crisis mode. It's all these little things that build up during the day, and then one simple thing happens, and what do? We go over the top, whatever emotional reaction we have with it. So we need to recognize these, and my favorite stays around here is we need to get space around that emotion. I have 2 things that I tell people all the time with this. I used to work with kids in school who were having troubles in school with behavior. One of them is this idea that in order to get a space around an emotion and not identify with it, because you remember that previous slide, I talked about we identify with the emotion. So how many times have we heard or we've said, I'm angry? How many have ever said that? Or I'm hurt, or I'm upset? Of course we have. No, you're not. You're Steve, or Pat, or Sue. You aren't angry. What you are is you're having an angry thought. Now, if you think about it, first of all, it sounds weird. It really does sound weird. But by simply saying that, what we are already doing is putting a little space around it, and we are moving ourselves away. We are not identifying with the emotion. And it's much easier to explore it when I say I'm having an angry feeling or I'm having an angry thought than when I say I'm angry. When I'm saying I'm angry, what I have done is we call it in psychology, we've fused with the emotion. I am angry. Now, how many of you had, and I get this too, justifiable anger? I love justifiable anger. I'm mad and I have every reason to be mad and you're not going to talk me out of it. Okay? Somebody cut you off in traffic and you make appropriate gestures and then you're mad. Well, the reality is that person doesn't know, unless you honk at them, doesn't know anything about it, but what are you doing? You're holding that anger. And what does that do to your stress response and your body? Your breathing goes up, the anger, the stress management, all the cortisol, all of that starts flowing through you. The only person that's being damaged by that is who? You yourself. So one way to get that space is to say, I'm having an angry feeling. I'm having an angry thought. It's amazing how much that already starts to open up that space a little bit. Now, the other part that I use often is when somebody says something to you. And I recommend this all the time. So there was a young lady I was working with who was in fights all the time at Tech High School, and she was in the day-long school suspension program. And so we sat and we talked about what was causing the fights. And of course, it's always something someone says to her, and then she reacts physically to that. And so I told her about a story that I had one person that presented for us or taught for us at the university, and he was in a meeting that I was in, and somebody said something to him that was a criticism about what he'd done or whatever. And he looked at the person, and he goes, that's very diagnostic. And I thought about that for a while, and I pulled him aside, and I said, can you tell me a little bit more about why you said that? And he said, well, Steve, you know, when someone says something to you, generally it's a should, an ought, or you need to. Those 3 words are some of the most damaging words that we can say to somebody. It's where they are dumping their bowl on you. They are telling you what you should do. They're telling you what you ought to do. They're telling you what my wife is really good at. You need to take out the trash. No, I don't. I need food, water, clothing, those kinds of things. You would like me to take out the trash? Ask. So one of the things that I was talking with this young lady about, I said, when someone says something to you, first of all, I'm having an angry reaction to that. And then say to yourself, that's very diagnostic. What he meant was when someone says something to you about you ought to or you need to, it tells you a lot about them. It tells you nothing about you. So that idea is that they are projecting onto you their oughts, their needs, their shoulds. And you don't have to accept that. You don't have to accept it. Now, sometimes people in full compassion and concern for you are giving you some good advice. You need to reflect on that. But that's not what was happening in this case. So I'm having this conversation. She's a bright kid. I'm thinking, oh, this is great. I'm therapeutic wonder. Next week, she's back in the program. And I look at her, I say, what happened? Didn't you do all these things when this girl said this to you? And she said, well, yeah, it ran through my head. And I looked at this girl and I said, that's very diagnostic. You're screwed up. I said, that wasn't the point. And so we had another long conversation about how people live in our heads, how we allow them to live in our heads, how we give them permission to rent our heads space free. Emotions are a huge issue as we do this. So my mom, as I said, lived to be 96. And I will never forget several times when she had mild cognitive impairment. And I would talk with her about something. What she carried away was not the message, not the content of the message. What she carried away was the emotions that I was expressing to her. And that's the idea of that's how we react to people. Often we're not reacting to the person, we're reacting to the emotions around us. So there's this poem, A Guest House. This being a human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He or she may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, I can't read it over there, the malice, meet them all at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for them because they have come as a gift from beyond. The idea is we recognize and greet all of our emotions because there's a message there. It's telling me something. When I'm angry about something, there's a reason, and I need to explore that reason. That's part of that inward journey. Okay, mindful presence, working with our thoughts. So thoughts are just an extension of what I've talked about here, really, with the emotions. Thoughts are the narratives we lay over those emotions. There's the stories we create, like I did with that thing a minute ago with my knee. I create a whole story. That's the narrative I put on there. There's a wonderful book by Jill Bolte Taylor called My Stroke of Insight. I highly recommend this book. And it's a story about her having a massive stroke in her 30s and her coming back over the years to do this. But in that book, there's a little passage where she talks about that fight or flight response. So that's that energizing fight or flight response. What she shows in there is that you think about those animals that are on the Serengeti, that gazelle that gets chased by the cheetah and doesn't get caught, because my story, the gazelle gets away. I don't care about cheetah. And anyway, the gazelle gets away. What does it do afterward? It shakes. It's an important point, by the way. It voids itself, and then it goes back to eating and drinking. Now, what would happen to us if we had just escaped a near-death experience? Do you know what just happened to me? You'd be on your phone. You'd be talking about it. You'd be reliving it over and over and over and over again. What happens is, in her point, that those stress chemicals, when the body is engaged in fight or flight, if left alone, exit the body in about 90 seconds. Now let's pause there for a second. How many have gotten really angry and 90 seconds later it's over? No, why? Because we've got a cortex. And we can live it, relive it, we can blame, we can do all kinds of things to keep ourselves in a stress reaction. Part of what the Mindfulness Project does is ask us to look at those stress responses and to look at strategies for doing that, because we do choose to live that over and over and over. So one of the meditations we do is something called Leaves on a Stream. And so if we had time here, I'd have you all turn and look at the Mississippi. It's a great time of year to do this. And what you do is you focus on seeing a leaf floating down the stream. And then as a thought emerges, you literally, well, okay, not literally, you figuratively take it out of your head and you place it on a stream. And you watch it. And it swirls and it moves and it comes back. Sometimes it gets stuck in a little eddy and it goes round and round and round, but eventually it'll go on down the stream. That's how we view thoughts. They emerge, we recognize them, we just notice them, and then we allow them to pass by. There's also one where we imagine we're a mountain and the thoughts are clouds that pass by. All of these are strategies for toning down the emotional reactions that we have to stimuli in our environment. So again, I'm not angry, I'm having an angry thought, and we allow it to float downstream. This one is a really nice one with kids. I do this one with kids a lot because they can visualize it. And so I had one little kid in there saying, fish just ate my leaf. I said, well, that's okay, and you can let it continue on down the stream. So the other part of this is finding your strengths. So in the handout you've got, there is a sheet, a 2-pager sheet that's, I apologize, it's pretty small on one of them. But one of the things, and Pat mentioned earlier, working with our strengths. And so one of the things that we do is we talk about what are our character strengths. So I mentioned earlier about positive psychology. Well, Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania and Chris Peterson at the University of Michigan developed what were called the positive strengths, the values in action. He did it intentionally as a counterpart to the DSM. He wanted something that focuses on our character strengths. And so what they came up with were 24 character strengths. Okay, I'm not getting all of them on this. But in other words, there's 6 categories down here, and then there are strengths in there. It's in the handout that was given. What we do with this is, and you can go online to viacharacter.org. I get nothing from this, so I'm not promoting it, and there's no cost. And you can take the test. And you just react to some items, and then you will get your 24 character strengths in order from 1 to 24. Now, just because it's number 24, it is still a strength. It's not coming through as much as the others. Then we do a whole bunch of things with these character strengths. We take time to ask questions. Is it really you? Does it fit? Well, we've got the first one, which works for me, not because I'm wise, but as a professor, all those things were things that just fit beautifully with what I do. Love of learning, curiosity, perspective, maybe not. Some of those other things in there. And so when I'm in my professor mode, my learning, my researcher mode, I'm in 7th heaven. Now, one of the things we do with this is, I know you can't see this, I apologize, but what we do is we map these onto these 4 dimensions. So if you think about this as mind and heart, self and other, we go through and we ask people, take your top 5 or 6 strengths, and we give them this page, and we say, highlight where those are. Now, what did I just say a minute ago? Love of learning, curiosity, creativity, those are all where? They kind of tend to be in that upper right-hand corner. In other words, what it tells me is I'm spending a lot of time in my head and in me. And so one of the things we also do is we ask people, does this work for you in your relationships, in your being compassionate for others? So maybe I'm not doing enough down in the heart and other dimension, that lower left. So I want to focus. Remember I talked about things we might want to learn? So I may want to focus down in that area in order to expand my ability to be present for other people. So we can use these strengths. They are always strengths, to become more compassionate to other people. Now, there's another fun activity, but it kind of depends on the strength of your relationship, is that you can take these 24, you can take these 24 things, these 24 strengths, so all these, there should be 24 on there. And what you do is we give them note cards, and we have them cut the note cards into fourths, so we need 6 of them, and then you write down each one of these, and then you give them to your partner, and you ask them to put them in order as that person sees you. Yeah, whoa. And then you schedule your marital counseling time. No, what is really good with this is we ask this question then. When we come back, we say the awareness. How do you manifest the strength? Notice the second bullet. Do family and friends readily observe it in me? Because if I see it as a strength in me, it doesn't matter if no one else sees it. It means I'm not acting on it. And so we ask the question then, other than telling my wife, yes, I am compassionate, damn it, what we do is we say, how do I need to demonstrate that so that she will recognize that strength in me? So is it core to who I am? Does it feel good when I'm really in that? And then how have I used it? And in what ways do I express it? And then the second part is we actually practice with our strengths. So this is that one I was saying is I look at that circumplex model and I say, I don't have a whole lot down lower left. Then maybe I need to focus on one or two this week. Remember, set an intention this week to work on this strength that I'm not demonstrating as much as I think I should or would like to. And what benefits does it bring to me? And then set an intention, a reflection, because many of these are not going to happen. Our habits are well ingrained, especially as we get older. And to change those things takes intention and time to do so. So the mindful applications of these. All right, then this is the other one. I'm going to close. How am I doing? I got a few minutes yet? It's called strength spotting. So this first part was really on me. Now I'm starting to move towards others and ask the question, what are the strengths in those that I see in others? So what we do is we ask somebody to imagine somebody who is, really important to you in your life. And then go to that thing and say, here are her or his strengths. And here's how I see them in this person. And then, and I think this is so important, is finding ways to share that information with someone else. When you do this, I really see this strength coming across in you. This is one of the strengths that you demonstrate when you're working with me or other people. I think giving people that feedback is critical. So it's really easy to do when we reflect on the important, positive people in our lives. So then we go to the next one, and this is where people say, I think I need to drop the class. Is I say, okay, let's pick somebody that you have challenges with, that you don't care for. And this takes a little time because remember what I said earlier, many times the reason we don't like someone is that we are reacting to their emotions, not to the person. So we ask them to look past the emotions and look at who the person is. What are their strengths? What do they bring that's positive to the relationship? And really see someone and rather than reacting to them. All right, remember there's 5 phases. I'm not going to get through all these. Gratitude and self-compassion. Gratitude is an extremely important thing. I'm just going to hit a couple moments on this. It is the transition from that first pyramid, or that triangle where we work inwardly. It's the next stage we go outward. We find that gratitude is that driver from me to we. And gratitude practices are out there, but I want to say they don't work very long for a reason. So there's a history. How many have heard of gratitude practices? At the end of the day, you write down 3 things you're grateful for. That's great, and it works for about 2 months. Then it just becomes a task. It's another thing on your to-do list, and you go through the motions. So what I advocate is a much more detailed process of this. So gratitude for my personal strengths. If you've ever read the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I just want you to think about this for a second. Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor who was the most important person, most powerful person in the world, hands down at that time. He wrote a journal to himself, wasn't planning to be published, about how to become a better person. Now think about your political leaders who have the humility to say, I need to work on becoming a better person. Marcus Aurelius didn't have to worry about that. He really didn't have the law apply to him. He was the law. But he wanted to become a better person. The first book in his Meditations is a gratitude practice. He identifies his strengths, and then he identifies the people in his life that he can attribute those to. And not always just positively. He had a father that didn't stay. And so from that person, he learned compassion because he didn't get it from his father. It's a marvelous look at this person's mind as he's trying to become a better person. It's a gratitude practice. So the journal, which is, you hear this about all the time, gratitude journal, I don't like the idea of just listing 3 things. Because what we find over time is that doesn't work. It loses its effectiveness. So the research says do it 2 times a week, maybe 3, and go into depth. Pick something that you are grateful for. Write about it. Talk about where it comes from. Talk about how you use it in your life. Talk about how you promote it in others. That gets us the depth that we're after in moving from me to we. Another thing you can do is a gratitude letter. I had somebody the other day who is a teacher say that former student had contacted her 20 years later. And she said that feeling when that person contacted her and said, I had you a long time ago in class, and it really made a difference in my life. That's the kind of communication. We also talk about maybe the person is no longer with us, then writing a letter to somebody like Marcus Aurelius was doing. Just recognizing gratitude in your life. I do a reference here for the Bounce Back Project out of Buffalo. They've got a lot of activities there, and if you search Bounce Back, they'll do less. All right, pathways, I'm going to do this very quickly. You heard a lot maybe about self-compassion. How's my time? I have 3 minutes. Okay, so be compassionate to yourself. But there are some barriers to this. Critical and negative self-talk, I hear this all the time. I hear a lot about shaming versus guilt. There's a difference, by the way. Men feel shame, women feel guilt. Shame is feeling bad about something you did. Guilt is feeling bad about who you are as a person. Which of those can you do much about? Shame. If I do something bad, I can try to rectify it. I'm sorry, okay? But guilt is about who I am as a person. That's harder to do. So we see a lot of, that's why Kristen Neff's work is almost always with women. We see a lot of guilt as personal attributions for behavior versus shame in that they did something bad and they need to rectify it. It's also a deficit orientation. And it's a concern over self-indulgence. Now, notice what I said earlier. This work is not self-indulgent, but when we get into things like self-esteem, that is. And there's a real difference between self-concept or self-compassion and self-esteem. Okay, I'm going to close. How am I doing? I have 20 minutes left. So that's what the 2 means, right? So here's what we're going to do: a compassion meditation to close out. So I want you to get back into your little your stance again. So if you put your feet on the floor, you relax, you close your eyes. Let's take another couple deep centering breaths, and then we're going to do a very simple but highly effective compassion meditation. Okay. So you're going to say to yourself, not out loud. What I want you to do is I want you to bring attention to yourself, you. And to yourself, I want you to say the following: may I have happiness and the causes of happiness. A couple times. May I have happiness and the causes of happiness. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May I be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And now I want you to bring to mind someone that you care for deeply, a loved one, a pet. And I want you to picture that person. Bring the image of that person to mind. And now I want you to say, may you have happiness and the causes of happiness. May you have happiness and the causes of happiness. May you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May you be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And let's open our eyes, take a breath. Now, the full practice, the next person is a neutral person. And then we go to a challenging person with those. But what we find is if you do that daily, just 5 minutes a day, and you do it at the beginning, remember the idea of setting an intention, it makes a marked difference in how you go about the world, how you go about your daily activities. You start your day with compassion for yourself and for others. Time has ended. Thank you very much. If you want the slides, I'd be happy to give you the information on it and send them to you. The email was steve.hoover at cmcoa.org. That's Central Minnesota Council on Aging. All right, and so let's work often to empty our bowl. I'll be around all day, so if you've got questions, feel free to just grab me and give me money. I'm sorry, grab me and I'll answer questions. All right, thank you very much.